Hey everybody, this is Aubrey Chavez from Faith Matters. Today we're bringing you a really amazing story that we can't wait for you to hear. It's the story of Sam Chiou, a remarkable young man who is non-speaking and autistic, and who was totally unable to communicate for the first 15 years of his life. His family was unaware that despite being non-speaking, he was actually hearing and understanding everything that they were saying, and he had so much that he wanted to share. I don't want to tell the whole story here, but after this long period of struggle, and largely through the faith and determination of his mother Mindy, Sam and the Chiou family had a real breakthrough that allowed him to begin to communicate for the first time through the use of a letterboard. Sam's wisdom and insights, what he's really been thinking all along, but never been able to say, are truly moving. So on this podcast, you'll hear the voices of Sam's mom, Mindy, and his sister, Julia, who helped tell the story. Sam was also present for the interview, and we also had the privilege of sending questions to Sam beforehand, which he took the time to answer, and you'll hear those near the end of the episode. For those that are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see what the use of a letterboard looks like in a brief segment after the episode ends. If you're currently listening on audio, just head over to the YouTube channel if you'd like to see that. We want to send a huge thanks to Sam and Mindy and Julia for coming on and telling this remarkable story. And with that, we'll jump right in. All right, Mindy and Julia and Sam, we're so grateful to have you here. We've just loved getting to know your family this last month, and we're excited to spend a little bit of time hearing Sam's story. So thank you for being here. And Mindy, I would love for you to just start. Could you introduce us to your family and tell us who you have with you right now?
Yes. So my name is Mindy Chiou, and I am the mom of Sam Chiou. He's my youngest. He's 20. And then I have Julia, who's on the call with us as well, who's the next one up. And then I also have another daughter and another son and 3 grandchildren. And Sam has multiple disabilities. He has epilepsy and cerebral palsy and non-speaking autism.
We're going to work our way through Sam's story, but would you maybe just start right at the beginning, how and when Sam joined your family?
Yeah. So, like I said, we have 3 biological children, but we just kept having that feeling, my husband and I, that we wanted to have a 4th child, and the 4th child never materialized. And so once we had pretty much accepted that I was not going to bear another child, I was like, yay, we're done. Don't need to worry about that. And then I got this really clear impression of that all of us are spirits who live in heaven with God. And then we come down and we plop down to bodies all over the world. And so we were all together there, but we were divided up into places all around the world. And so I thought about, actually visualize little spirits plopping down into China. And since my husband is Chinese, I thought, oh, well, that would be perfect. We could do a Chinese adoption. And this was really the first time adoption had crossed my mind. So it's interesting, all these years wishing and praying and hoping for another child, I didn't really think about adoption. And so I went home I was driving when I had that impression, and then I went home and immediately started researching Chinese adoption. And I was like, okay, this is not going to work when you have 3 other children and you have so much uncertainty and you don't know how long you're going to be stuck in China waiting for the child. So I thought, no, that's not going to work. And then I happened to be thumbing through a church, like a local church DIY newspaper that was sitting on my kitchen table. And there was an ad for the church family services department saying they were looking for foster parents. And I thought, oh, maybe that's something I could do. So I called the number, and instead of getting, an administrative assistant or someone, I got one of the social workers. And he said, well, tell me more about you. Tell me more about your family. And I described our family. He goes, oh, I don't think you should be foster parents. I think you should be adoptive parents. We decided to go through that system. My husband and I agreed to do it. We went to lots of classes. He was serving as a bishop of our congregation at the time. It was a lot of work. And we faithfully went to the required classes with the other couples, and one by one they would all disappear because they were chosen because they were cute and young to be birth parent or to be adoptive parents. So after, I feel like it was about 1.5 years of going through that process, I just said one day, I said, Heavenly Father, I'm done. If you want us to have another kid, I know you can make that happen, but I'm done hoping, praying, wishing. And I put all the baby stuff in the attic and turned the room that we had built onto our house for that fourth child into a library. And that afternoon, I got a call from a social worker saying that there was a Chinese baby who had some mild special needs, who was the parents were looking for a family for. So the really heartbreaking circumstances that led to him needing to be placed for adoption were that he has a biological sister with extremely severe autism that was just it was just all they could handle, and she never slept, and mom wasn't getting any sleep, and they were just, so he was a very wanted child, but when they realized that he was also going to have autism or developmental disabilities, they started looking for a family to place him with. And the way that they found us, they're not members of our church, but they had a therapist in their home who was a member of our church. And they said, and they had not been able to find anyone that they felt comfortable with. And then they said, why don't you try this church family services department? And so they went to the office and they opened the notebook. And this is a place that's 2 hours away from here. So it's all of California. Each office has a notebook. And they saw our family and they said, that's the family. And the other thing that was really, it took faith for us to adopt a child with special needs, but it took even more faith for them to entrust their child with us. And one of the things that was a sacrifice, a big sacrifice in our family, was my husband was serving as a bishop at the time, but they are Christians, and they felt like the symbolism of him serving as a bishop was very important, and that was a sign from God to them that it was okay.
And can I just add?
Yes, please.
I was not. I was pretty young during this whole process, but when I got older and I started asking more questions, it's very clear that this was definitely, designed by God. Samuel's name is Samuel, and they named him Samuel because they asked for him. He was a wanted child, and that's the story of Hannah and Samuel, I believe. And then Hannah gave her son Samuel to the priest at the temple. And so when my mom talks about my dad being the bishop, that was what they saw, and that was their reassurance from God that this was the right thing to do.
Wow.
And Hannah came once a year to see her son at the temple, and she made him a little coat every year. And so they sent him a coat every year.
Wow.
On his birthday. Yeah. And a lot of other wonderful, generous gifts.
Oh my gosh.
But the coat is symbolic. And the other thing that I think if you talk to anyone who's involved in adoption, they need signs like this to reassure them that they're doing the right thing. And the other sign that helped me, because I wasn't sure that I could take this on as we got to know what would be involved in the therapies that would be involved. But the day that we got the call from the social workers saying that there was a child, right before that, either before or after that phone call, my older son from the living room said, "What's Sam short for?" And I had no idea. He was on the computer, and I said Samuel, and he goes, "Oh yeah." And we didn't know his name. And so as I was lying in bed that night, I'm like making plans, because that's me making plans. And I'm like, okay, she said the people have accents, so that means they're from China. That means he doesn't have an American name. So we're gonna need to pick an American name. Then we'll use his original Chinese name. I'm already making plans, and it's only been a few hours. And so I'm lying in bed thinking Samuel Chiou, that goes really well. That really works. And so I called the social worker back the next morning because I had so many questions. I said, number one, what's his name? And she said, his name is Samuel.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. That's amazing. And I think you're so right. Just those little assurances. In in whatever you're dealing with, just getting those little assurances that that God is aware of the situation is sometimes what gives you all the strength. I hope that this is an interview that people will watch because Sam is here with us. But will you just talk about why that was so important to have him? He is non-speaking, but this was a really important thing that he could be on this interview while you both talk with him and about him. So would you explain to the audience?
Yeah, because the reason we're here is because he has learned to communicate by pointing to letters on a letterboard, and he's brilliant, not just regular intelligence, but he's brilliant and funny and has a personality. And so this is a 20-year-old human being who we're talking about, and his whole life he's been talked about as if he's not here. And so part of us being honorable and honoring him and respecting him is for him to be present when he's being talked about. And he spelled a lot of things to contribute to this interview, but it's not easy to necessarily do things that involve recording and video when we're together. So, but it's important to have him here.
Yeah, thank you to Sam and to you both for doing that, because I know that this is a new experience. We're really glad that you'd be willing to try it with us.
Thank you.
Julia, will you give us a little bit of your perspective? Do you remember this era when Sam was new to the family, and what do you remember about growing up with him?
Yeah, I remember it almost like watching a slideshow. I was 7 when he was adopted. I have scenes of when we were meeting with the birth family. I've scenes of meeting his birth siblings, scenes of the adoption ceremony, scenes of, I remember we went to like an Outback Steakhouse afterwards. And I remember thinking like, we just went through there was this ceremony where one person was passed from one family to another. And then we just went to like a Western themed restaurant. And like, you just take it one step at a time, I think is kind of what I had gotten from that. Just, it seemed it was normal life to me. Whereas I was a kid, this was my sphere. I had never lived outside of the sphere. And so I didn't know what was average or not average. And I was also the youngest child. And so I had never seen another human grow up. And so when I was watching my brother grow up, I didn't know what the normal milestones were. I realize now I did not understand the situation while I was in it. And it's been a great blessing having perspective now as an older person to see, my mom just explained that story about how they came to decide to adopt this person with special needs. But, as an adult who could be making those kind of decisions, and to think about the courage and the faith and the prayer that it really takes for someone to do that, gives me perspective on my childhood, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Julia, did you feel like as you grew up together that you, and prior to Sam finding a way to communicate with words, did you feel like you had some sort of communication with him, whether it be heart to heart or whatever it was?
Sure. Yeah. Honestly, like, this sounds sad, but no, I really felt like I remember that we were having a conversation at dinner one time. I don't remember how old I was. This was before Sam started spelling to communicate. And my dad said, I think Sam knows his name. And we're all kind of like, okay, like, well, where's your evidence? And, I would test it out and, call Sam's name and see if he responded. Back then I didn't have the eyes to be able to interpret his body and what it means, but I really felt like, I don't know, the best way I've learned how to describe it is I had nowhere for my love to land. Like, as soon as Sam was adopted, I felt like I loved him. Like, he was my brother. As soon as we adopted him, that was just normal life. And, I did everything I could to help him. I I would be the little therapist's like helper in the house. I would go with my mom to all the therapy sessions. When I got older and I could drive, I would take Sam out on drives because, you know, he couldn't go anywhere. So I was like, well, if I can go somewhere, I'm going to take him with me. But I really wanted that relationship, but not knowing if he knew who I was. And on the flip side, not knowing him, like I knew the outside, but I didn't know his inside, and I didn't even know if there was an inside to know. I just felt like I had all this love and it had nowhere to land. Yeah. So when I talk about what the difference has been, you know, him being able to communicate, I feel like that love finally has a place to go, that I can have this two-way relationship with him.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned that your dad, I think, was the one that said, I think Sam knows his name. Prior to Sam learning to spell to communicate, was there a general sense among family members or differing opinions on, you know, sort of, and how did this change over time? Like there's more going on inside than we currently know.
I believed, after meeting some other people who actually ended up able to help with the self-injury, I believed that by healing his body from autism, that autism is not a mental illness, which I still believe firmly, that he's got all kinds of medical issues that are contributing to his issues. But I figured when he's healed from autism, he'll be able to talk. He'll all the milestones will kick in. He'll develop normally. He'll be able to talk. But I really, like, honestly felt like I was taking care of a pet. I mean, I didn't really feel, I knew that his spirit was there. But in terms of, like, he's looking at me now, but he didn't look at us. He didn't smile unless we were swinging him, or, I just want to underscore what Julia said. I really didn't have a clue, honestly.
Wow. Yeah. I just can't stop thinking about, you know, it's so, like, parenthood can just be so grueling anyway. And it's that feedback, I think, that sometimes keeps you going. So it's just so hard to imagine being in this position where you are giving and giving, and you really don't know if he is, I mean, he's receiving physical care, but I just can't imagine being in this position of not knowing if he's receiving the love, like if he can recognize you and accept and love and be grateful for all of the love that you're sending. And it just, I really just cannot fathom years and years of not knowing. So I'd love to hear how where faith comes into this story, in this section of the story where there wasn't a solution to communication yet, where you were kind of in this like space where you didn't know if it would ever change. I mean, you had no reason really to believe that it would change. So how did your faith play a role in giving you hope, or giving you strength or purpose, or, you know, what role did that play for you?
So every day we noticed milestones and we celebrated. So when he walked, and when he and he was funny, and, you know, the kids would knock him over, like he's sitting and look, you can knock him over. I mean, just we have so many beautiful pictures, so much joy, so much love. It's just that we didn't get that speech, or that the expressions on his face that gave us that feedback. But, you know, he loved to eat, and we would enjoy feeding him, and it was fun to, you know, take him on a car ride and open the window and let the wind blow in his hair, or swing him. And then when we would swing him, he would smile. I remember there's a wonderful talk by Henry B. Eyring where he talked about, where he kept a journal of the beautiful things that happened every day. I call it the Tender Mercies talk, but just all the evidences of God's love every single day. And so I really religiously have done that, have really tried to pay attention to those things. So through the worst, absolute worst times, and there were some nightmarish, I mean, many, many nightmarish days and moments where it was really, really hard trying to figure out how to get him to stop trying to hurt himself. that there were always still moments. And so I did all the things. I prayed. I sang hymns to him. We listened to the Book of Mormon on tape. When we drove around in the car, and I thought about this today, we were listening to podcasts of church talks, conference talks, BYU Idaho talks, church music. So we really flooded ourselves with uplifting content. And I'm thinking back on that now, and now that I know that his brain is in there, and he was probably really enjoying that because he's very religious right now. So I also, throughout this process, the other thing point that I really wanted to make was that my prayers were answered. So I'm praying constantly, right? And they weren't answered immediately, but they were answered usually in the form of somebody being dropped in my lap who had something that would help. And so one of the people who was dropped in my lap said, hey, he's sick. And this is another autism mom. And she said, you can go have your doctor order these tests for his gut and yeast and things like that. And this is what you will find. And she was right. And so we changed his diet. And I was growing my own weird kefir on the counter. And so through this, and this is just one example, but therapies and different things that came to us that were able to be helpful. He was able, the self-injury just went way, 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 way down because he was in a huge amount of pain, and it felt better, believe it or not, to punch himself in the face than to have his stomach hurting so bad.
Wow. I've heard Julia, I've heard you talk about your mom's relentless optimism. And it's so interesting to hear the story unfold, because there does seem, it does seem that faith for you expresses itself as total acceptance of what is, and like complete hope that answers are coming. And it just seems like all along your story that just happened over and over again. And then eventually in sort of this miraculous way. So I wondered if maybe Julia, as we kind of get to this era where you find some solutions for communication, can you talk, because I know you're kind of an expert at, I think you're probably both experts in all things non-speaking autism now, but could you talk about the barriers to communication? Because this is something I really didn't understand until I heard you speak about it. And then maybe you can tell us just about about when you heard about Sam spelling for the first time.
Sure, yeah. So, I guess kind of the background in terms of how to understand, going from an understanding or a paradigm of this person is not intellectually in there to, wow, this person is completely intact intellectually, but they have issues, or their obstacles are getting out that intellect. That understanding, or I guess what we talk about is there's a difference between speech and language. Language is a purely cognitive ability. You can have thoughts about the words that are going, I'm speaking to you, you're having thoughts about the words that I'm saying, and those thoughts are staying in your brain, but you're not speaking a single word. You still have language, or you have language. Speech, on the other hand, is a purely motor ability. It's the ability to coordinate your teeth, your tongue, your lips, your articulators, your jaw to make speech sounds. And every form of communication, every form of getting language from one person's inside head to another person's inside head requires the use of the body, whether that's making a facial expression, gesturing, writing, typing, spelling, speaking. And so we're finding that those with autism, or maybe I should back up and say, you really can't know if the reason that someone is not communicating or is not having successful communication is because they don't have the language, or they don't have the speech, or they don't have the purposeful motor. Those are two separate variables. And until you coach their body and give them a reliable way to communicate in a way that their body can communicate, you have no way of testing what language is actually in there. So for those with autism, speech is a very fine motor, very difficult skill. So is typing, writing, or anything that requires, dexterity, moving small muscle parts. And so when we find that when we take someone, who's non-speaking and has autism, and we give them or coach their body in a form of communication that uses gross motor, it's not fine motor. So using your shoulder to extend your arm to point to a letter on a letterboard and pull back, that lowers the motor demand of, a type of language output or type of communication, which then frees them to communicate everything that's inside their brain. And so again, when it's really the things that we're seeing as communication, body movements, speech, until you give someone a reliable form of that, you can't know what's inside. And so for Sam and for so many kids with autism who have done letterboarding, when they get to the letterboards, it's like being liberated. They're finally given a chance to show us what's actually inside, because they've been taught in a way what they need. Before they had communication, we didn't know what they needed, right? We were doing the best we could to interpret their body as what we knew to interpret it as. And until someone said, I think that we should try this other thing, or I think that person's in there, let's try giving them a different way of communicating. It wasn't until then that we were able to, discover this. And it's kind of, to bring it back to something my mom said, like, I think the thing that I have to reckon with the most and forgive myself the most for is talking to Sam like he wasn't there. And so when you asked about what was that first time like when I saw him spell, I mean, we talk about, you brought up my mom's optimism, which was, I think, the major demonstration of her faith. And to go back to your question, Tim, about, did people have almost different levels of optimism or belief? My mom definitely had the highest. And she unfortunately got ridiculed for that sometimes. We're not going to lie. We were bad sports. But when I saw, so when my mom told me, hey, Sam spelled Massachusetts today on a letterboard, I was like, okay, this is another mom crying wolf. Sam did this, Sam did that. And we're like, okay, Mom, yeah, sure. But then when I watched the video, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that was him. Like, it's not what we call clean spelling. Like, there are mispokes, he's having trouble, but it was one of the first times that anyone was ever teaching him how to use his arm to point to a letter on the letterboard. It's like watching someone learn to play piano for the first time. But I had never seen Sam move his body with so much intention before. And so even though it wasn't technically clean, I had no doubt that it was him. And that moment was like a moment of reckoning, because it was like a flash, like your life flashes before your eyes, because you're like, oh shoot, what have I said in front of him? And it's changing your entire paradigm. And then it's also simultaneous joy that he's in there, and like, does he know me? Does he know who I am? And then fear, what is he going to say about me when I get to hear his real thoughts about me? Does he love me? Does he hate me? Does he, there's just this beautiful Pandora's box, but like, you wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Can you talk about that experience when you did start to communicate with Sam? Like, you talked about this moment of, of reckoning, of potentially regret for certain things. Have you worked through that specifically with Sam? Have you addressed that with him as a sister? And how has that process been of getting to know each other on that level?
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought about a lot about our story and our relationship, and I'm working on a memoir about it. So I've had to write and think a lot about it. And I've read him portions of my memoir where I'm really candid and honest about how I felt. I mean, I remember there was an afternoon where it was right in the years when the hitting was really bad, and tension was really high in the home. And there was an autism professional who had told us, like, you need to tell Sam to stop. You just need to like whip him into shape, basically. And I went to his room, and I think, as far as I remember, I think I yelled at him for like 20 minutes. And I had no idea if he was in there or not. And, that was one of the moments that, came back to me, when he first started spelling. And I have had to work on that. And it's a lot of forgiveness for yourself. A quote that has helped me a lot, I believe, is Maya Angelou. Do your best until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And we were doing the best we could. Like I was just a kid, and I remember one day coming home from high school, and it was a bad day. I could tell just by the state of the house, laundry, there's blood, there's poo, and, walking into the house. And I gave my mom a hard time. I said, well, you know what you were getting into. And she said, I had no idea what I was getting into. We were all just doing the best we could, living day by day. And it was that faith and that optimism that my mom had that got us out of it. It was miracles, it was prayers. I can't think of anyone more Christ-like than my mom, who had to deal with, wrestling her own son, trying to save him from hitting himself, from the blood, and her relentless optimism. I cannot stress how relentless her optimism was. And I can't imagine anything other than the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ that gave her that strength, because I can't imagine what else could give you that kind of strength other than my mom just being awesome. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
yeah, no,
Yeah,
that was so
thank you.
great. Thank you. Mindy, is there anything you want to add about that first experience and being vindicated a little bit? Maybe.
Wow, I'm just so glad I invited Julia. As mom, we can never get enough. That's really beautiful, Julia. I when you're in it and you, as a mom, you feel bad because you haven't been able to help, no matter what you do, it's not helping your child. It's really nice to know that you didn't suffer too badly, I guess, or that I really appreciate your words so much. I really just have to give a shout out to the earth angels the person who led the program, who was the first person to tell me that Sam could have a different life. And he was at this center for neuroplasticity, and she didn't turn him away. And she talked to him like he was in there. And then she launched this really intense program but she was the first person to plant the idea in my head that Sam could get better from the condition that was causing his autism symptoms. And then after this program, another member of our church told me about this other mom, and she was the one who said, look, he's sick, and this is what you need to do with his diet, and you need to get these blood tests done, and you'll find out that what I'm telling you is true. And she was right. And that's when his health really started to improve. And we would not have been able to even start the Spelling to Communicate program if we hadn't gotten the self-injury under control. So, yeah.
Mindy, what do you feel like you've learned about Sam? Like how have you gotten to know him in a new way since he's learned to spell?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and I have a lot of his quotes, not just your interview questions, but a lot of things he spelled. The first few words that he spelled that were original, I don't know how you say it, Julia, open. So when he first starts spelling, he's only spelling things that you ask him to spell or known answers, because you have to know which board to hold up, because the alphabet's divided into 3 boards. And as he gets more accurate and his muscles are built up and his hand-eye is built up, then you get to a 26 letter board. So one time she asked him, what would Sam save money for? And he spelled college. And I'm like, what? And then she asked him another time, we had another person who works with us who was being trained on the letterboards. And she said, how did Lisa do on her first time on the letterboards? And he spelled killer. And, and then I have spelling parents can just talk your ear off about what their kids say, but I have some really, really funny things. So I guess the humor, the sense of humor, he spelled living with me is like being blasted by hidden landmines combined with jokes and scripture references. And that is true.
It's true.
It's true. So he's just so funny. I could go on and on about that, but he's also like really profound too.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll read some of his
Yeah.
the responses. But do you have his Christmas poem on hand by chance? I have it right here. I heard your story, but there was something about this poem that when I read that, just it gave so much clarity to the whole situation. Like I don't know if it's that he's talking about memories from when he's so young that is really touching, because you realize it just really makes it sink in that he really was there. He was always there, absorbing everything that was going on and was able to talk about it. And then he writes this beautiful poem. And so if you've got it, I'd love for you to read it.
I do have it.
I do have it. Would you
have it? Would you like to read it? Sometimes I like to have other
Sure.
readers.
Oh, I would love to read it. Sure.
Yeah.
So it's called, and I didn't remember what year this is. When was this? Was this
He just
a couple months ago?
wrote it a couple
this
months
is
ago.
just this Christmas. Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, I don't think it was for Christmas.
Okay.
But it's about
Christmas. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's called Gold, Frankincense, and Miracles. And it says, I remember songs heard only before Christmas. I remember my sister's voices singing. I remember smelling baked goodness from mom's kitchen. I remember Bowie running like he'd seen a ghost. I remember sitting on the leather sofa, wondering if he heard my pleas. Quietly or not so quietly, sitting in my world, waiting for the miracle of his birthday and the release from my silence. Christmas miracles don't happen only in December. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we wouldn't have gone through that. So
Julia, would you want to jump in and talk a little bit about once Sam learned to spell to communicate, how his story has progressed and what he's doing now?
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing. So again, I think my mom's optimism plays a role in this as well, but just for some context, when you first start spelling, and you can't necessarily spell things openly. Like my mom explained, you have to practice on the three boards with three boards that have the alphabet broken up onto 3 boards. The goal is, the targets are bigger. And so you could practice. And then once you get really good on the 3 boards, then you can move to a 26 letter board, to a keyboard, and so on. And it's kind of like, how in piano, you would start with a really simple song and then work your way to a more difficult song, and then you can freestyle on your own. That's kind of like, the analogy that I would say. And so Sam is just getting to the point where he's starting to freestyle, which is awesome. When Sam was still in the phase before he was freestyling, so to speak, my mom was like, well, we'd always ask the question of baptism, and then like, no, he's not eligible. He's, sinless. He doesn't need to be baptized. And then we learned that he was fully, in there, so to speak. And we're like, okay, well, baptism. And this was before he could be open. And I remember having long family discussions about like, does he need it? Does he not need it? Let's wait till he can choose it for himself. Let's wait till he's open. And he did. That was one of his first goals, was that he wanted to be baptized. He answered all the baptismal interview questions through a letterboard. And from there, after he got baptized, he said he wanted to serve mission. And I think it was a question in a lesson, like what's a goal you have? I don't think he was asked specifically, do you want to serve a mission? He brought it up himself in a lesson. He said he wanted to serve a mission. And then during the pandemic, my mom got a call from our bishop and was like, hey, service missions are a thing. And we had kind of put the whole missionary discussion aside because we were in the middle of a pandemic. And again, my mom's optimism and can-do attitude, she hopped on it. And it's been a year. They've been on their mission for a year now, on a service mission. And it's just absolutely incredible. Having that faith and optimism, speaking from someone who was on the other side, who was like, Mom, you're just a just a well-wisher. This is never going to come true. You're just setting yourself up for hope fatigue or for disappointment. I was the wrong one. We were all the wrong one. My mom was the right one. And Sam, like, kudos to Sam for, putting in the work to be able to spell. It's not easy. It is not easy for someone who has a body who is constantly fighting you and who you don't have control over to gain the control to spell. And so the work that he's put in to be able to communicate, and then to use those precious moments of energy to talk about wanting to go on a mission, and so much of what he says, like he spelled, is scripture references, is declarations of faith, is, like he has a limited amount of time to communicate or chances to communicate, and 90, if not more % is dedicated to testifying.
Will you talk about what you're doing together on his mission?
Yeah. So service missions are awesome, by the way. And so they're very flexible, and kind of the slogan the service mission leaders use is teaching missionaries bring people unto Christ, and service missionaries bring Christ to the people.
Wow.
And so we just get to do whatever we want that will serve people. And so there are, and then we have, every month we have a mission conference with the other service missionaries in the area. And then every week we have a mission devotional with the other service missionaries in the area. So they've given Sam assignments to prepare ahead of time on the letterboard that we've been able to read as part of the mission devotional. Depending on your ability, there are lots of, so there's some service missionaries who they'll serve at the Bishop's Storehouse one day, Habitat for Humanity another day, Catholic Charities, a lot of refugee work, Ronald McDonald House. And there's also a place that recycles computers called Computers to Kids. So what we do is we go to a church-owned camp that's an hour away, an hour drive each way, and which is great. He loves being in the car, so that's a feature. It's not a bug. And we water plants there, and it's just we get more out of it than I think the camp gets out of it. But that's a beautiful experience. And then when I was thinking about this mission, it's a lot of work to take care of Sam's body, even though I know that his brain and his spirit is in there. It's a lot of work to take care of Sam's body. So I just kind of told Heavenly Father, I said, so my mission is just going to be flowers. I love to do flowers. And so I was kind of like a joke to Heavenly Father. I was like, look, I'm just going to help him go to his assignments, and I'm going to do flowers. But that has blossomed. Good one. I didn't even mean to. I'm not funny that often, but yeah. That really, it has blossomed though into when you give people flowers, give flowers away for free, which I always do. You end up with more opportunities to give flowers away for free. So like there's domestic violence survivors that when they go to their new homes, they get a bouquet. And then I made friends with the hospice person. And so I make bouquets for her. I'm doing some for a memorial service, and then I just give them away to cheer people up. So and then we do spelling, and what's really been amazing too is Elder Chiou is using his gift with words. I mean, he's answered people's prayers just by I'll share something that he spelled, and someone said that was just what I needed.
One thing that's been on my mind is the listeners who are hearing this right now and are inspired by Sam's story, but maybe in their own times of deepest trial. So their corollary for, when Sam was really in that phase of self-harm, those days that were incredibly dark for you. And they may be thinking, where's my miracle? When is that gonna happen? Do you have, if you could speak directly to those people, what might you say?
Yeah. And we definitely have to because Sam has a lot of advice for those people. And I wrote down a couple of ideas. Expect miracles. I had that written. Expect miracles. Notice the small, tender mercies, because you will find them every single day, even if it means that you have the ability to hear a bird singing. Be prepared to follow your answers to prayer. I love what Aubrey, you say this a lot in your podcast. You say, consider the fruit. And I felt like I did a checks and balance to see if this was a true prompting from God, and then and then make sure the fruit was good. So you will get answers to your prayers in unusual ways, and you need to be prepared to follow them. The other thing that's huge is, I feel bad, like, if you really don't have the health to have a hobby, but seriously, like, I am not one of those people who, I'm like a slacker. I like, instead of doing my homework, I was always sewing or doing something creative. And I used to think that, I should work harder, I should study more. But now I realize that's such a feature that with this marathon that now we've got him at 1 and now he's 20. I know how to have hobbies and do creative things. And while he was having so many seizures that were not under control, and we were trying to figure out what medications would work, at the same time, I was doing surprise room makeovers in people's houses. And I was making memo boards. And so I'm always doing something that uplifts me, that's really creative. So no matter what's going on, you just have to find the joy and gratitude in life.
Wow, that is such an amazing list. Thank you. We just published this book from Catherine Knight Sontag and had a conversation with her. And she talks about in her book and in the interview about how connecting creativity is to the divine. And so, but I think sometimes we think of that as a selfish, little side thing that we'll do when we have time. And I love this idea that that is the truest essence of who we are sometimes. And so it's a direct connection to God. Julia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. I'm trying to think
what you'd say to people who are dealing with their the most
Totally.
difficult things.
And I will say, while I grew up in the same household as my mom and Sam, my trials were definitely very different. I've never felt the burden of 24/7 caretaking for someone. I feel the daunting of someday that being my task currently, but I've never had that on my shoulders before. And so I don't know if my wisdom is as profound as my mom's, because in the context of having to deal with what she's dealt with and being able to give that advice, that I think really shows the merit of her advice. But I guess just from my perspective, there's a line in my patriarchal blessing, I guess I feel comfortable sharing, that says, God will give you the experiences that you need so that you can accomplish the things that he'll ask you to do. It's almost like a catch-22 or a chicken and the egg. I never thought that my career or, a memoir, I never thought I would write a memoir. I never thought it would be about, growing up with my brother and autism. And I have seen being able to connect the dots in the past. I have seen how God has used the experiences in my life, growing up in this household, having the education that I have, and put me in specific places so that I can help the most people. In my current job that I have, I work for this autism therapy company, the therapist that was the first person to start teaching Sam to spell. And I consult parents all the time, and having been in their shoes, or at least in proximity to their shoes, is so helpful for them, being able to consult with them, to talk to them, to help them through this journey. And that was 100% orchestrated by God, all of these different things coming together. And so I would say, it's really hard when you're in the thick of things and you don't know how the dots are going to connect, to have that faith and to have that hope. So hopefully if I can share my story and say, okay, I'm on the other side of my mountain and my dots are connecting, that can help someone be like, okay, I have hope for my future too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Julia. One of the things that, as we sort of move toward wrapping up here, one of the things that I think is most exciting about this interview is that we were able to send Sam questions directly, and he was gracious enough to take the time to answer those. And you guys created video of this, and so for our audio only listeners, you can head to our YouTube, and we'll put that video as part of this video on the Faith Matters YouTube channel. But for the purposes of audio, I thought maybe the way to be most true to the intent is maybe Aubrey or I could ask the questions, and one of you could respond using Sam's words that he spelled for this. All right, well, I'll ask these questions. Okay, Sam, what has been the hardest part about not being able to communicate verbally?
Most upsetting reality is no one thinks I'm interested in them.
What are you most grateful for?
Strong women.
What advice do you have for people facing difficult trials?
Get God. Work hard. One day at a time.
What brings you joy?
Time with family.
How has serving a mission helped you draw nearer to God?
I now meet Jesus everywhere.
What do you want the world to know about people in a position like yours?
Right now, stories of autistics like me happen to make headlines as anomalies. I really want others to know I'm not special. We hear and understand everything.
How has your faith given you strength when you felt overwhelmed?
Listening for who the Lord upheld in times of trials sustains me during times of difficulty.
Thank you so much. Wow.
Thank you, Sam.
Is there anything, Julia or Mindy, that you want to bring up about any of these answers? I can tell you, I was so moved by his first answer to what's been the hardest thing about being able to communicate verbally, because in like my own mental exercise of imagining being in his position, it seems like it would be most frustrating to not be able to get your needs met, like not to be able to say exactly what you want. And yeah. I was so moving that the thing that has been hardest is the other side is that he wants to be able to give to other people and to like have that real intimacy, like this back and forth sharing of interest and needs. And that says so much about who he is.
I'm really glad you caught that. The other one that just really, well, I'm just blown away by how smart he is. I mean, I don't use the word anomalies. He's just, and he really wants to advocate for his people, which is, but the other thing that because it's so hard to do. And when the people who see the video, I hope you do go to YouTube and see the video. He's able to be very efficient in his use of words. So he's really an amazing poet. But when he says something like, I now meet Jesus everywhere, I mean, that gave me, you could have an hour, 2-hour discussion about what that means. You could think about how it means that when you're serving others, you're serving the Savior. You could think about how when you're serving at the camp, you're surrounded by him because you're surrounded by his creations. Or when you're meeting with other missionaries, you're surrounded by other people who are representing him. And I'm sure there's many other ways that's relevant. So I'm this super, super proud mom, and I have some other things that he's spelled. Is there any way I could read a few more?
Please, yes.
Okay. This is to give people hope. He said many things to give people hope. When he was preparing a talk, he said, the talk might help more sisters, brothers hang in there during tough stretches of life. every word I have spelled in Jesus's name has been of his grace. When he was, I think it was his 17th birthday. And again, when we started starting to communicate, we were able to ask him what he wanted for his birthday for the first time ever, what he wanted to be for Halloween for the first time ever. So we asked him, what do you want for his 17th birthday? And he spelled eat cake. And Don Marie said, anything else? What about a gift? And he spelled gifts are getting old. And we're just dying. And then she says, well, isn't there anything you want? And I'm like, come on, we want to know what you want. And he spelled EM equity. And we're both like, what? And so Don Marie's like, look, you got to Google this, Google it. So I Googled it and it was a thing. Like it wasn't a misspoke. It's really a thing. It stands for Emerging Markets Equity. These funds offer investors access to countries and regions that are undergoing economic transition. I'm like, oh, so you want investing in emerging markets for your birthday? And he's like, I'm kidding. And then I'm like, okay, Sam, you slay me. Is there anything else you want? And he spelled the faith to intend to complete a mission sometime. So that was when he first kind of said that. And then we said, when we were preparing for his baptism, which was later that year, we said, what can we do to help your head be more comfortable going under the water during the baptism? And he spelled, please try not to take too long about a dunk. So I could just go on and on and on. But Julia, do you want to tell him that story about, how you kind of knew that he forgave you and he loved you, and then how he was joking around with you?
Yeah, I guess this is kind of the end to my story about, the guilt and the forgiveness and the reconciliation with Sam. And so again, there was a period of time where I knew that he was in there, but he couldn't spell openly. So there's this like waiting period of there's stuff to know about him, but I don't know, right? How do I interact with him now? Like, who is he? And it was a little bit awkward, at least inside for me. I think a couple things that helped is that I was constantly seeking forgiveness from Sam, and yet he couldn't give it to me. And I had to learn to forgive myself, that it was an internal thing. I had to forgive myself. And another thing I learned is I kept thinking, like, I don't know Sam. How could I project his forgiveness onto me? How could I assume that he forgives me without him actually saying a thing? And I remember I was giving him a bath one night, and I was like, I am one of the people that knows Sam better, besides my mom. Like, I have caretaken for him. I have, I've fed him, I've clothed him, I've taken him on drives. I've spent so much time with him. Of the things that there are to know, just being with a person, I know all of those things. And so I was able to, before have him saying, I forgive you, that was another way for me to accept his forgiveness. And I guess it was pretty funny. Right before I was preparing to move to New York for grad school, I was just in the house at home walking around. I can't remember what I was doing. And suddenly I hear Sam's in a spelling lesson in the living room, and I hear some like giggling and like, Julia, you should come over. And he was in the middle of a lesson, went rogue, went freestyle, and said, Julia, you picked the worst major in grad school. I was going for creative writing. And
not just creative writing, you have to tell them really the worst major. Creative nonfiction, which I got a lot of flack from people about how you're not going to make any money, whatever. I did it and it's done, and I'm happy for it. It was meant to be. Anyway, and then he, my mom and his teacher kept, asking him about it. And he said, I'm just being funny. And then he said, I only wish for good moments for you in grad school. And then this past birthday, or I guess for some context, before Sam started spelling, and when we were in the interim before he
before he could spell openly, I think the thing that was weighing on me the most was did he love me? And that maybe is selfish, but I think it's an honest question. After feeling like, all I had done for him, both negative and positive, like where did my life weigh in the balance, I guess, to be dramatic about it. I even remember one of the first things he spelled openly was love, mom, Griffin, Lisa, dad, or something like that. And me and my sister were not included in that phrase. And there's nothing to read into that. I mean, those were the people that were sitting in the room at the time, and me and my sister were not there. And it was his first open phrase. He can't spell every person he loves, but I remember being like, oh no, does that mean he doesn't love me? Because I'm reading into it. So for my birthday this year, I got to sit in on his spelling lesson, and, my mom said, hey, do you want to wish Julia a happy birthday? And the first thing he spelled, he didn't spell happy birthday. He didn't do any introduction. He just said, I love you, was just the first thing he spelled. And yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We have a good relationship.
Thank you so much for sharing the story. It's so different. It's so unique. There's so few listeners who are going to be in any sort of a situation that will feel applicable, except that this up and down and, hopelessness and optimism is so universal. And it's just really inspiring to hear how you've survived over these last 20 years, and how you've made such beautiful, moments that together and on this mission. And we're just so grateful that you would come and talk about it with us. Is there anything that we missed that you want to close with, Mindy?
Yeah, I think Sam said it. I mean, I think what I always want to remember is that he's an extraordinary being, and he has lived through things we will never understand. And what he's doing with all of his heart is trying to liberate everybody within the sound of our voice. So if anyone knows anyone who's a non-speaker, you can contact Julia, and she'll right.
Yeah,
she'll hook you up.
I'll help you.
But thank you. This has really been, I was so nervous about being recorded, and I just feel like I know you guys, and you've just been so lovely to email with and to talk with. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your time and your story.
Yeah, your whole family is so inspiring. Thank you all.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Sam, Mindy, and Julia. And a big thanks to each of them for participating and sharing this remarkable and inspiring story. If Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get the chance, we would love for you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. We read all of the reviews, and it really helps us to get the word out about Faith Matters. We appreciate the support. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.
Okay. I, R and, E and, M and, E and, M and. I remember, you're gonna have to do the whole word for me. B and is the only known part. B and, I remember, M and, let's see, or my, S and, I and, S and, T and, get it? E and, R and, my sisters, V and, O and, I and, that's a good I like that. I and, C and, E and, voices, S and, I and, N and, use your eyes, S-I-N, gotta use your eyes, bud, and you're trying, G and, I and, N and, singing, get that G, singing, L and, L-M, or is that it? Singing, Q, just singing.